It's a very young country, only 68 years in history. After the fascism in Italy and World War II, at the end of World War II, in 1945, colonized by by Italy, and also by France, that had joined it administratively to one of its colonies. The British colonized it and favorized the monarchy from the Saudi Arabia and without but taking part for their own interest. In 1951, when they had their independence, until 1969, where some officials proclaimed a new independence and took out the colonial armies that in charge of the country. And so far, then, they still have the riches in their soil. 50 years were necessary to reduce blood and ashes that has the process, and that they have a hybrid war in civil society, in the Libyan society. That is one of our critical moves today, and after we'll see the board and all the parts that are involved. The war is already set up in the country, with several tribal parties fighting for their interests, and they want to be the only authorities in the country. The UN supports one of those in order to give it a sense of institutionality in a failed state, because this is what is happening today. Yes, it's a failed state. Know what took place before. The declarations that are coming, the statements afterwards will explain what happened in February in 2011, and on Saturday the armed forces will carry out a military defense or move on Libya in Libya. The acts have consequences, and the will of the international community must be respected. The United States will contribute with their military contributions in order to protect civilians and to fulfill all the exclusions of military forces. Just say yesterday, I will not deploy land arms. So Gaddafi has to leave power, and I am pretty sure that we have made great advances, but afterwards we still have many works. We will be. I'm very happy to say that we will invest a lot of money in Libya too. So colonial countries are setting up a plot to control the oil in Libya. So in the world map, and to know the limits, geographic limits, and we have all of the West and Central Africa, and of course the North, the Mediterranean Sea. On March 2011, the NATO began the protectorate under the decree of the UN Council, Security Council, previously approved, and they set up with the central bank. Libya resources were frozen, and they took away by Western colonial parties. On February this year, we had the UN African. They wanted to celebrate a peace meeting for this year, and afterwards, the countries and the presidents that ended in Ethiopia in last February. The council will be set up on the first half of July under the auspices of the African nations and the UN, and it's inclusive. A forum for peace and reconciliation. The idea is to have this final document, is to set up to celebrate the new elections for presidential elections in October, of the upcoming October. And we will check out the web portal Sputnik today, February 20th, which has published a few hours ago. Trump prorogates the sanctions to Libya under the instability threats, and there was a note sent to Congress. We have a bigger problem with this destabilization in the country if we keep up the sanctions, particularly those that do not want dialogue and don't want democratic process for Libya, and they want to exploit the people's resources and riches and to perpetuate the conflict in the country. It's very paradoxical coming from the White House, one of the main parties in the war. Of course, I'm talking about the government in the war against Libya, which began in 2011. Another poll published on June 5th, 2018. It's from a French intellectual, president of the conference, Axis Corpus. Libya, according to the UN and the hard reality. The UN is after, it's a very political word. It describes the author. The first director, Ian Martin, said, from Amnesty International, organized with Al-Qaeda and refugees also from Libya and Turkey to form the Libyan army or Syrian army. So this depends directly from the ex-assistant Hillary Clinton in the Department of State, who wanted to destroy the societies in the Middle East. This is a theory that from a French intellectual, from what the policies applied by the United States along with its allies in the Middle East. So it's a complex panorama with different interests. We will go back to the main ideas. Only a couple of months were necessary so that Western powers devastated a prosperous nation and ended with all the conquests that guaranteed the Gaddafi's order. It's also always necessary to set up the for actuality, and we will have a now we'll have a meeting with it. Greetings from last February 27, 2011, when they had the social revolts in Libya with the support from the UN and the United States, and they took down Gaddafi's government. Libya is still a sense of unrest where corruption predominates, and they have all kinds of corruption and black markets, and especially weapons and human slave trade, and the growing influence of terrorist groups. A country which has been dismembered, and authorities fight for power. On one hand, the party that rose up in 2015 with after an agreement with the UN, they had fights for Tripoli and the authority at the east of the country, controlled by the national Libyan army, and Marshal Haftar, who has set up their influence and has wanted to control the south, a marginated area, and after all the unrest in the nation, which has become a setup for jihadists and traffickers from all the world. It's a very dangerous position that threatens not only the internal stability but also the regional stability, and has a repercussion in Europe through terrorist attempts as well as migrants that affects directly Italy. But the powers, the internal powers, also fight with make the serious, even more serious and more dangerous, and then they try to end the political crisis and also keep their own interests, oil interests and financial interests. When the UN impulses presidential elections that may end in a new conflict, as when some parts are not being recognized, is also part of these interests. Also, the regional powers, they are fighting for their own interest with their own support, with financial support and military intervention. For example, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. And this is the reality taking place in Libya due to the intervention by Europe and the United States, and under the name of humanitarian aid and democracy, an intervention, an interference that wants to control oil business, and they have applied false arguments applied also in Afghanistan and Syria, and then want to apply it in Venezuela. That is what I have to. That's the information I can provide so far. Thank you very much from the Syrian capital, and we will contact our guests, and we have to ask if the aggression from NATO to Libya really responded to an internal conflict in Libya, or was a strategy, long-term strategy to dismember that entire region through the Great Middle East and to own the resources of the region. Our critical move for today is to inform who is the failed state in Libya and to control of the resources and regional factors. And on February 17, 2019, what did Muamar Gaddafi do for Libya after the 8 years of the revolts that beneath the article saying that the situation in Libya under Gaddafi, what Muammar Gaddafi takes down the monarchy from and sets up a revolutionary council that set up a Muslim country, and so Gaddafi had a revolution, and they tried to set up a map and a route that Gaddafi wrote in 1950, and they had alphabetization for the people, that were agrarian reformation, access to water and education. They set up the resources equitably in the country, and nationalized the oil, the most controversial move, which the government also gave credits, engines, machinery, and seeds. Housing was considered a fundamental human right, and they received $50,000 to buy houses and whatever they need. And they have 0% rates. And the central bank was a sovereign institution that served the population, and they did not answer to any foreign country. So under that line, we have it was an exemplary country in Africa and in the Arab countries, and and afterwards the European and NATO and UN backed some revolts and ended in military intervention by NATO, and the assassination of by the leader Gaddafi, who was accused without proofs of a genocide. In March 2011, the NATO began the military operation under the protection of the Security Council of the UN, and which had been previously approved. In the National Oil Corporation and the Central Libyan Bank, and the resources from the people were taken by the countries in the West. On October 20th, Gaddafi was captured and murdered by some oppositors in his birth city. And afterwards, there are 7 months where they had 10,000 missions with 40,000 bombs and missiles. The results, among others, were there's 120,000 Libyan people, and set up a government set up by European and United States country. And after divisions and political divisions and tribal divisions and interests, now the country is controlled by these militias, and the dismemberment was such that the government and power of the countries. The first one is the union government, which is set up in Tripoli and is recognized under the Security Council of the UN. The Libyan army is set down at the east of the country, and they own the oil fields, and this is the one with the most power in the country. The third party is by leader Eric Gana, and they have good relationship with it's part of the consequences of the 2011 war and the migration crisis. 500,000 people have had to run away, and now set open to corruption and there's not open to corruption for Africa and the Arabian countries. Now we have a severe cause of migration for people. We see the UN from the human rights institutions run a research based on migrations and refugees, and in a period of 20 months until 2018. The conclusions were that we have executions, extrajudicial executions, torture, violations, rapes, and forced labor by the authorities. And we had human trafficking, migrants and refugees who can reach the coast in order to try to cross the Mediterranean. They are intercepted by the Libyan guards, and they go back to the torture and to the torturous regime they have just escaped. And this is what the research has thrown out. Beneath this, we see the Venezuelan writer and moderator Roberto Hernandez. He gives a very clear image regarding the question that we made. The triumph of democracy in Libya. This is where he compares what used to be in 2007 and what is happening in 2011 after the intervention. We will go now to the analysis by our guest. In Colombia, we have Miguel Solano. She's a Manuela Solano from human rights teacher and professor, and from Argentina. She's a journalist and a teacher, university teacher, and for international politics and human rights. Both of you are welcome, and I will begin with Libya. So with the war in Libya, they set Libya back 40 years when the population lived in a tribal morality, and they lived tribal morality in the desert, and with the population in misery. What is the recomposition? How do you see this? Yes, it's a thing that has something that it has happens once and over and over again, and one of the United States' strategy, where they pretend to set up democracy. But it's something we do not see in Libya. No democracy. Situation the same that happened in Yugoslavia, where they was invaded and bombarded in the name of setting up human rights. And of course, they are no human rights. They have a society that is divided. They have military fragments in militias, and what we see here is people have to understand, or common people should understand. For example, I have studied the modalities of United States intervention, and we can see a pattern. And then also for the common people, we see common people in the United States where they are being manipulated, where they, as the strategy of human aid, that the government does not want to receive this, that people are suffering. This is one of the patterns that to create a monster, to say that this country needs to be quotations, they need to save democracy, and 3, create the conditions to propitiate bombardments, and that is that is where you drop humanitarian aids by these airplanes. Also, in other countries, when you have the arrival of planes, you have a military aid. So this is why we are concerned of this in Libya, and we're also set up also what is happening in the border, because they're coming closer, and the next thing that they create is they need a martyr. They need a dead person to say that, and say poor people in Venezuela are being attacked, the civilians are being attacked, and now we have a circumstance, and on the other hand, what is happening, you debilitate internally the military forces. You see the planes are coming, humanitarian aid is coming, the borders are closed right now, there's nothing you can do. And this is what you have there. You're creating the borders, and with the supposed humanitarian aid, and a makeup of a concert or something, and now you have a martyr among the civilians. Then they too begin sensitizing or sensibilizing the public's opinion in the United States, and who do we have to attack? This is a very difficult moment because the United States Trump does not have the permits for military action. So he wants to appeal to the Venezuelan army, and so that they become the martyrs, because they will not allow Trump to go into this territory and they will not allow young people to die, just what happens in other parts. But what about this situation? Where would we talking about this is the rebirth? Can you see recomposition or a rebirth in Libya? No, I think that they have created a great big chaos in Afghanistan, etc., and several places in the country, in several places in the world, because this is how they open the country up for transnational corporations. And after everything has been destroyed, they try to rebuild the country, and its divided country is more useful, and they can control that. And we have what we have seen. The worst thing that we have seen is human trafficking, weapons trafficking. They use misery, pain, suffering, and poverty they have created in other places, so that then they say, look at the circumstances in Libya, and what we want to do is we want to take over this country. That they knew that Gaddafi had created the conditions that allowed people to have a dignified life. They don't like this. That the self-government, the self-sovereignty, and democracies where they live with dignity. What they like is what they say they're going to set up. In that way, of course, now we have to have a great big task to educate public opinion, and also we have the big media that they have taken over. I was watching on the BBC on the weekend, Deutsche Welle, other media channels that support this vision that Venezuela needs to be saved, and this is very serious because that is the justification, the moral justification for murder. And afterwards, you have bombardments in the name of the public opinion, which has already been directed. And I think that the way out right now is what Venezuela is trying to do, trying to maintain a democratic order and save the possibility that the people say, no, we have the right to not be invaded. Okay, so this is intervention modality is global, and we can see that also here in the Caribbean basin in Venezuela. And now I want to talk with Mariano, and we have one last question, Mariano. In a report from published in 2017 by the Committee of External Affairs by the UK Parliament, we saw that in Libya they had intelligence errors, and it set up a way for terrorist groups to be born. Was it a failure in Libya, or was it something that opened the doors for the Western powers? And what about the boomerang with the immigration? So those thousands of people that want to cross over the Mediterranean. Good afternoon, everybody, and to everybody in Latin America, especially the Venezuelan people. I believe that the report was very eloquent. The analysis was also very. There are no errors. They searched to set up imperialism, Western imperialism, neocolonialism, and the Western powers is what they wanted to happen, to take place in Libya, to destroy and dominate. And we see now in Libya the mafia that traffic with humans and weapons, and they have taken over Libya, and yes, and you can see this very clearly in the report. They set up the possibility that the looting from the West from people that was a sovereign people, and that is the recipe that was followed in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and also that now the common denominator is the resources, the natural resources, in this case the oil, national oil, in the hands of the people, and also the common denominator in Venezuela. And we have to say that these are the natural resources and political factors also, because Libya at some point with Gaddafi as now with Venezuela from the Bolivarian, the onset of the Bolivarian Revolution, are very dangerous to the empire, because they give examples to the people, letting them know that we can be free, they can live with dignity, they can have alternatives. Right now, they don't have we don't believe the lies at the end of the 90s to the end of the ideologies. Right now we have there's another path possible, that not only by the one set up by the empire. The empire has always set up this modality. Bolivar said, and United States seems to be set up by the providence to sow calamities all over the region. And now, today, in the name of humanitarian aid and freedom, they want to destroy, which will not allow, they want to destroy a sovereign country like Venezuela. So my question is two aspects. What is convenient? What is necessary at this moment for the powers for this fragmented country, which has abundant natural resources, and we could see in the context that we established at the beginning of the program. And the question also is there a combination of factors and players in this, and the Russian Empire is also seen with this, and they set up with the political powers internally. Could they help in some way? Because if Libya, we're talking about a rebirth in Libya after 8 years after the war, and they said that no, the chaos has been such that it is not possible. So I think, what is your opinion, considering what I have been saying about Russia, and what is convenient, or what is for the interest, safeguards the interest of the West? Yes, there are several elements. On one hand, we can say that the fragmentation of a country, we have to analyze it in a context, a bigger context, which is the fragmentation of a nation. And this point, there's a commonality with the Arab countries and our countries, and the north of Africa, and to the Arab countries and the Middle East. We can say that with their subtleties and differences, they have there's one big nation. They have one religion, one language, most of them, and a history, shared dreams, shared mysteries. We can say this is happening with Latin America, from Rio Grande to the Patagonia. And yes, it's true. The Western powers are always praying after the reaches of Libya. I believe that in Gaddafi's history and the Green Revolution, we should have learned something, that at the moment Gaddafi and Libya was going forward, and they achieved great things for their people. When he trusted in some European leaders, I believe he made a mistake strategically, and which was very costly. In the Russian's hand, Russia is trying to come closer to the power set up in Libya, which in Tobruk, and which is the east of Libya, trying to save what can be saved from that state, which is now a broken state. And the difference with Venezuela is, I believe, that with the Russian Federation and Libyan city are strategic geopolitically. I don't know if Venezuela, beyond the declarations from support declarations, I don't think that it's not if Venezuela is not as important as Libya or Syria. I believe that Venezuela is more alone in this historical phase. Thank you very much from our side, and thank you for attending us. And our time is not enough, but yes, we still have some analysis to go further in, and we will come back to you if possible through our possible in our program. So we're talking about the oil has been very determinant in this, and after all what has happened in Libya when the resources, and after they destroyed the project of this African nation, which was a model that was promoted by Gaddafi worldwide. And we will go now to the final analysis of the program. We're back with critical moves and regarding the fragmented state of Libya, what happened after the wars in 2011, and with the fragment of the nation and regionally. And first, the Western powers wanted to take down the African nations and to take over the resources from the very prosperous nation until having military actions through bombardment and missiles. And yesterday we have lots of oil resources and fresh water. Internationally, Gaddafi turned over to try to set down problems between the region and the countries, the African countries and the Arab countries. He worked for the one currency for the other regions, and to have independent from the United States dollar, and part of his income from the oil to help development in countries of sub-Saharan countries, and he pretended to unify the African country, and which was a barrier for the colonization of the continent. Only with water, multinationals, including French and United States multinationals, they wanted to take over the fresh waters and the aquifers that wanted that would hinder development from Chad, Egypt, and other countries. And there's after a broken country and still still in war. Now the oil field is still 900 kilometers out of Tripoli, and which is one of the biggest in the countries, with approximately 1/3 of the actual productions. And the military troops, Libyan military troops, and militias and tribes from the south, they are fighting for control of this area, and now that has control of Bristol, another French multinational, and they have the control from the multinationals and other militias from Chad. They took over the installments, asking for the government in Tripoli, and which has the support of the UN, and to invest resources in the poorest areas, and oil fields in the rest of the countries. In January, the army got together at the beginning of this month, and they set up an operation against them, and they took over the oil fields, and they have set up the oil fields. They took over the oil fields since December. Now we have the lawyer from an expert in the Middle East and Central Asia. Thank you very much. Isabel, there's one informed from the British Parliament, and we had a previous question regarding, which was published in 2017, that after the military intervention and the regime in Libya they had the same critical objectives, was to take over more oil participation in Libya, have influence over the region, and to give a French military to have a position to set up their operations in the world and to set up their long-term goals over Gaddafi's goals and to fortify the Francophone power in the region. And specifically for France, that right now they have their own interest fighting against Italy. Of course, yes, we're seeing, we see the same script. When colonialist states, they fight among themselves, they do it under the slogan of democracy. They have the declarations of their interests, merely financial, merely of domination of their own transnationals, multinationals of their in the regions, and they want to take over the natural resources like Libyan resources. And after 6 years of war, after the fragmentation led by Hillary Clinton and Sarkozy, and just like in Italy, they called for democracy to take down supposedly quotations a dictator who did not want to play in the democratic chessboard. And we see here that this slogan that was slogan of trying to take over and dominate and dismember a country that was had the highest level in the area and very rich in natural reserves, and they're carrying their own gold reserve, and now is dismembered. And that slogan, which the colonialists carry, and this is and the anarchy that is now very well and alive after the war. In Libya, it explains clearly that interest, that colonial interest, and the war that we see, and the French interest regarding their dream of coming back and dominate the threshold or the gate towards Africa. And we were talking about colonialism and of all of the north of Africa, which is not on the board, and that dream of coming back and regain their bases, which is no longer actual. And right now, the arrival of China, Russia, and Turkey, and all these countries that are coming in that are giving resources back to the continent. So there's financing for infrastructure, and at that moment in time, specifically Muamar Gaddafi called the African Union his sibling, his brother. So they join strengths and to be the owners of their own resources and their own riches, and to step away from the petrodollar market and attain their own sovereignty. And right now we can see a dispute from those colonialists, from French Italian colonialists, when they are always at the door of some recession, at the door of some economical recession, and has been declared by the IMF, and specifically to Spain and to Italy and France, and to want to avoid this recession that will hit the European continent. Therefore, these interests that gaze over the other regions where they have more natural resources, and they have their own transnationals that are multinationals, and especially through the national oil company, and see what they can be, what they can satisfy themselves. So right now, you can see that democracy, prosperity of people is not worth anything to these masters, these dominating nations that want to have sovereignty of the region. And we were asking at the beginning if what happened in Libya belongs to a strategic colonization strategy for colonization, which it has been answered previously, and after with and not only in the region but also in Latin America and the Caribbean. But we see these attempts, of trying to build these strategies, even though we know that we're going through. Inevitably, we have to compare it with Venezuela, with what the same is. If you can see it through a geopolitical panorama. Do you think also that the aggression against Venezuela, we must understand it in that context? But we will hear Nicolás Maduro, who was saying this on an interview that he gave to a brother channel. They cannot understand that Maduro has weapons of mass destruction. They cannot invent this. Just like what happened with Iraq. They cannot make up, they cannot invent that we have massacres. Like they invented it for Libya. They fabricated a crisis with a noble objective, in quotations, to have a humanitarian intervention. But we have to be responsible. Say we have to be prepared. Venezuela has, with all your Arab support, and if someday we're attacked, you will come to our aid and your defense. So what do you think about this strategy? Do you think it's the same? And let us hope that this won't happen. This won't take place. All the Venezuelan people, from my perspective, from a spokesperson from the Arab community, I do say we have to take those examples that history has given, which have already took place in Syria, Libya, Iraq, in the name of democracy, in the name of freedom, in the name of prosperity, North American prosperity, which wants to be implemented. They have destroyed and massacred people. Now, many people are saying, why are the governments that want that they have the power? They don't step back and let the people speak. The people who have been subjugated, the nations have been subjugated to speak out. This is not an easy situation. We have voices that we can see where the sovereignty of the people, defending natural resources, defending sovereignty and our freedom to determine our own will, because there are no colony, no colonist, no multinational, no World Bank, no international strength or organization that wants to look after the welfare of a people, just like the people themselves can do it. So this is a self-sovereignty. It's the best way for the people. The empire is not ever really looking after welfare. They just want to give rice or flowers with only the objective of dividing and creating anarchy. So they can loot, they can sink countries and sink them into hunger and ignorance. And this is what the empire wants. So yes, we can say that what has the same script that they applied in Libya, Syria, and in Iraq, they have the same subtleties, the same elements necessary. And of course, we talk about a country that is geopolitically very well placed for the reaches of the empire, so several miles from their coast, just like Venezuela is placed. So the recomposition in Libya, what do you think about it? No, the recomposition necessary needs to come from internally, not externally. As long as they have anarchy and the external interest, I don't believe they can have the understanding between the parts. We have seen Haftar on the one hand, who safeguards the mobilization, for example, the south of Libya in order to dominate and their oil fields, which is a role, very important role, to take over the sovereignty of a country, that they can have a main role regarding domination in their country and rescue Libya from the subjugation and the imperial subjugation and other countries imposed by the empire. But I do have to highlight that, or I do have to emphasize that we have not seen with him so far a government imposed by the countries or the foreign countries, or a democratic country that supposedly, and under the slogan of democracy, they cannot dominate, because the force which has been set up, the voices that are being raised against the empire and their mercenaries will always be alive. And so we do not want this in Venezuela. I hope that Venezuela is prosperous and a voice for peace that we have seen historically and through their government and their president, who has been legally and constitutionally elected, who is our leader, Maduro. Thank you very much for your appearance here in Critical Moves. Strategic position in the north of Africa, in the Arab world, and with the Mediterranean, they still are it's still in a crisis after Gaddafi's murder in 2011. So military intervention and humanitarian intervention and violation of human rights, they took over a revolution and to justify their interference. And we see the duality between now tribal and conflict between tribal factions and interest from Africa and Europe, and that is the chaos and a setback for the country, and which is the result of the interference that began with from financial and media setup and a protest for a change in regime. And we see what our guests have said. It's an interference, and it's the same script applied to other countries like Venezuela and the Caribbean. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.